Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Shastra Jayate. Surya Vangsha Jayate. Om Hari Om. Namaste, everyone. It is absolutely wonderful once again to be with you for our regular Monday live stream satsanga. What we're going to be doing today is something a little bit special. For those of you who want to take a look in the description of this live stream video, you will see that we're going to be going through quite a few verses. And the title of this, very specifically of this talk tonight, is The Glories of Sriman Narayana. And before I dive into these verses, first let me give a little bit of an introduction about why tonight is a little bit special and what we're going to be doing is a little bit different. First of all, we are indeed going to be talking about Sriman Narayana. That is about two individual personalities who together comprise the one whole, that is the Supreme Godhead. So the idea in Sanatana Dharma, very specifically, is that God is a necessarily unitary being. We are panentheist monotheists. We believe that ultimately there is only one supreme being. Philosophically, there cannot be more than one. Otherwise, that takes away from the very idea of supreme. There is one supreme being and can only be one supreme being. At the same time, however, this supreme being is Sriman Narayana. Really, in a way, functionally, in relationship to us, two beings. And that is Sriman. Sriman is Sri Lakshmi Devi, which is the feminine aspect of God. And then Narayana is the masculine aspect of God. So thus, the highest divine ontology of the totality of Sanatana Dharma is that there is indeed one supreme being. That one supreme being is of dual nature, i.e. masculine and feminine. They are one, they are the same, and yet can be seen in these two different aspects. Now, before anyone gets confused and starts trying to do theological wrangling with us, let me explain that similar to Christianity, you see how in Christianity there is the idea also of radical monotheism. There is one supreme being. Yet in Christianity, that one being is a triune being. So thus, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They are seen as exactly the same, yet functionally we can see three aspects of the one being. Well, in a similar way, indeed, as a follower of Sanatana Dharma, understanding that our concepts go back an infinite amount of time before Christianity, so they probably borrow this from us. But in the same way, in Sanatana Dharma, we believe in a somewhat similar but infinitely more sophisticated idea than a triune being, and that is a dual being. That is that God, again, ultimately is one monotheistic being, one supreme absolute divine, on the one hand. On the other hand, how we relate to that being is that we can see the masculine and the feminine aspects of God, which makes more sense, actually, than a trinity or any other sort of division like this. The reason that is the case is because we see the same thing manifested theomorphically in the material world, i.e., because God is this dual being of God-Goddess, of Shakti-Shaktiman. Because of the fact that God is this, we see this reflected in a smaller, much less perfect way within the rest of let's say, living beings. We see that there is man, there is woman, etc. And truthfully, this is a topic alone that I can talk about for hours, because I've actually written a book about this called The Shakti Principle. But I'm not going to do that. That's not the purpose of what we're going to be doing today. Rather, I'm telling you all this just by means of introduction, that what we are going to be speaking of today is indeed the glories of Sriman Narayana. So both are here in these verses that we will be looking at. That is, both Lakshmi or Shri or Sriman and Narayana are both here. And how is this the case? Well, first of all, these are several verses from the Vishnu-Dharma Shastra, Vishnu Smriti, it's sometimes called. It's been translated a long time ago under sometimes the title The Institutes of Vishnu, but this is one of the Vedic scriptures and an important one. And what we're going to be looking at today are several verses in which very specifically both Sriman, that is Lakshmi, and Narayana are present within these verses. And that is that these are the words of Sriman. These are the words of Sri Lakshmi Devi. She is speaking and she is explaining the qualities and praising the qualities of her consort, of that being who is really none different from herself, and that is Narayana. So thus, understanding the nature of this divine moiety, of this divine union of the feminine and masculine aspects of God, of God, Goddess, understanding this, what we see is that indeed both are present throughout these verses. Again, first because it is Shri who is speaking, but she's speaking of Narayana. So thus, functionally, two different things are happening. That it is Shri who is doing the descriptive, who is doing the description, and it is Narayana who is being described, but indirectly, she's also speaking of herself, being non-different, non-distinct from Narayana. So I hope this makes sense. This is the significance of what we're going to be looking at. All that being understood, it has to be also understood that this is why what we're going to be doing today is different and of great significance from what we've done in the past. So with that, we have many verses to look at. Let's dive in right now. And we begin with Vishnu Dharma Shastra, chapter 1, verse 50. Sri Lakshmi Devi said, O Narayana, sustainer of all beings, O Jagannatha, sovereign of the world, you hold the shell, the discus, and the mace in your hands. You have a lotus, that is Brahma, springing from your navel. You are the Lord of the senses. You are most powerful and endowed with conquering strength. Conquering strength. This is God. Now, having read this verse, let's go into this verse and exactly what it is that Sriman, again, that Sri Lakshmi Devi is saying about this being who is non-different from her, she being the feminine aspect of the divine, Narayana being the masculine. So first she begins by naming who she is talking to and about. This is important. This is important. Why is this important? Before we even dive into this, why is this important that she names him? Well, again, vagueness is not a thing in Sanatana Dharma. Vagueness is not a thing in Sanatana Dharma. Rather, radical specificity is what is of importance in Sanatana Dharma. So thus, the reason why she names him, and in fact several times, she makes it very clear throughout all these verses who she's talking to. She's not talking about this person, that person, whichever great god or goddess happens to be before me. No vagueness whatsoever. It's very specifically one and only one being who she is speaking about, and to, and that is Narayana, that is Vishnu, not anyone else. Pick a name out of the hat of another god or goddess, she's not talking to or about that person. She's talking to Narayana. So specificity, like surgery, because this is even more important than surgery. This is the meaning of life. So she names who she's speaking to. Oh, Narayana. This, of course, is the primary name of God. Narayana means the sustainer of all beings. Now, that being said, she then announces another of his names. Narayana, Vishnu, has an infinite number of names, an infinite number. And they're all of importance. They are all names, the power of which, if we meditate upon any of these names of God, we have the ability to achieve liberation. So now she mentions another name, Jagannatha. And this means the sovereign of the world, the sovereign of the universe, the king of the universe, the emperor of all reality, etc. This is Jagannatha. But now she goes on to describe several of the attributes of Narayana. You hold the shell, the discus, and the mace in your hands. Very good. These are some of the things that we know that Vishnu, or Narayana, holds in his hands. And let's talk about these very briefly. First of all, by shell, what is meant is a conch shell, very specifically. This is one of the symbols of Vishnu. The conch shell itself represents purity. It represents victory over adharma, over evil. And then there is the discus, the Sudarshana chakra, very specifically. This is a chakra also that Vishnu, that Narayana, holds in his hands. It is a weapon. God possesses weapons, the likes of which have the power effortlessly to end the universe. And he rarely, if ever, uses these weapons. But he has them. Why? Because he's God. And he has all power. He has all power. So the Sudarshana chakra is one of the things he holds. And then again, another weapon, then that is the mace. He also holds a mace. Indeed, you can't see them, but to my left, we have Sriman Narayana here on our altar. And indeed, these are the things that he is holding. And then it doesn't say this here, but in the last hand, the fourth hand, he either will be in Abhaya Mudra, that is saying, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. Sometimes, depending on the iconography involved, he'll be holding a lotus flower, he'll be holding different things. But usually he is in Abhaya Mudra, saying, do not fear. So, all that being said, let's go on a little bit. You have a lotus, and by lotus, it's also indicating the creator God, that is the demiurge, Brahma. You have a lotus springing from your navel. Indeed, this is how actually every single universe comes into being, is that Vishnu is lying on the ocean, lying down, and from his navel there springs a cosmic lotus flower. On top of that lotus flower comes the first being in that specific universe. And who that being is an Atman who, previous to becoming Brahma, was in the spiritual realm, not with Vishnu himself, but in the Brahma Jyoti, as what has become an individuated unit of consciousness, but who sadly has fallen under illusion and now has fallen into the material world. That being the case, that one small step down, he becomes a Brahma. He becomes quite literally a creator of a universe. And there are practically an infinite number of universes. Now, what am I saying? Each one of us who has come into this material world, however we have come, initially was a Brahma. And this was the process. So this is what is being indicated here. Now let's go on. Now she continues to describe some of the qualities of Narayana. You are the Lord of the senses. Now, very interesting how she calls Lord Narayana the Lord of the senses. Why is this the case? Well, several reasons, actually. We all have senses. There is no living being that doesn't. A person might, try to say, well, but what about a tree? No, a tree has senses. It just doesn't have as many senses as we do. Indeed, we know that a tree can, at the very least, feel, because there have been experiments where they have hooked up trees and plants and flowers to various scientific machines. I forget what they are, EKGs or something, and they'll cut a little piece of it and it registers pain. So yes, every being has senses, not necessarily 5. Some beings have more, some beings have less, but all beings have senses. And for the vast majority, and when I say the vast majority, I mean truly the vast majority of living beings, we are not the master of our senses. We are not the Lord of our senses. We are beings who get carried away by our senses. Indeed, it tends to be a quite advanced yogi who then has mastery over their senses. So what Lakshmi is saying here, very simply, is that you are God. You are of necessity and naturally and inherently the Lord, not only of your senses, but of all senses. And this is a very esoteric thing. In fact, I'm weighing with myself how deeply I should go into this. Certainly, God is the Lord of his own senses. That's a given. Anyone with any theological intelligence about the nature of God would understand that. Well, of course, God is the Lord of everything that he is. He is the master of all things that he is and that he possesses. But more than this, there is the concept of Sharira Shariran. This is a concept that is found very specifically in Vishishta Advaita Vedanta. And it's a very important concept. And it is the idea that even for every living being, actually, that is, again, every living being, whether human beings, animals, plants, whatever, every single living being who has senses, which means, again, all of us, that God is the indwelling spirit even within our spirit, that we are here as indeed Atman, but then God is also there as Paramatman. So the idea of Sharira, Shariran, is that while we are experiencing with our senses, ultimately God is also experiencing with, through our senses even, what to speak of his own. And that being the case, while we may be that being who may not be in control of our senses, God, who is there within us, also experiencing all of these perceptions, is in control. So he is the Lord, literally, of all senses in existence. So, very, very interesting statement. And she ends by saying, you are most powerful. The superlative. Only the superlative applies to Narayana when speaking of the attributes, of positive adjectives. So not, oh, you're pretty powerful. You know, I know a guy down the street, he lifts weights all the time. He can lift quite a lot. I think you can lift more than him, probably God. See, this anthropomorphic idea of God, that what is God? Oh, God is just like one of us. But, oh, imagine, okay, I guess God is pretty great. Imagine Superman times what, 8? What do you think, 8, 9? That's God. No, of course, that's nonsensical. God is most powerful. In other words, there is no being, there is no force, there is nothing conceptual or perceptual in any reality whatsoever that is more powerful than God, A. But then B, whatever you can find that would be second most powerful, it's not that God is first more powerful than that secondary powerful thing by, oh, this much, but by an infinite degree. By an infinite degree. So this is what is meant by you are most powerful and endowed with conquering strength. Endowed with conquering strength. God is a being who is the source of all strength. You can think of the strongest things in reality. You can think of Mount Everest. I was speaking with one of my students earlier today about Mount Everest. And you can think of the grandest mountain, the greatest mountain, and you can multiply that infinitely. God is stronger. You can think of the strongest power anywhere in this universe. God is stronger. And again, not merely stronger, but by an infinite degree. This being the case, this is why especially if we ourselves have been deprived, at least in our own minds, and in some cases in reality, if we feel that we have been deprived of strength, we must turn to God. If you want to be strong, if you want to be a strong person, if you want to be a strong man, if you want to be a strong woman, if you want to be strong, and strong in a good way, not merely brute strength in order to abuse others, but no, strength, but also with goodness, you turn to God. You have that proximity toward God in such a way that God's strength, God being that being who is the source of all strength, God's strength begins to empower you. You want strength? Strength of will, strength of character, strength of virtue, even physical strength, strength to do the right thing, strength to never give up, strength to always have hope. Turn to God. because God is that being who has all-conquering strength. Very good. With that, let's go on. And we're going to now do the next verse, which is, again, Vishnu-Dharma Shastra, chapter 1, verse 51. And it begins, "You are beyond the cognizance of the senses. Your end is impossible to know. You are brilliant. You hold the bow Sarnga. You are Varaha, the boar avatar. You are fiercesome. You are Govinda, the protector of cows. You are ancient. You are Purushottama, the supreme person." Very good. So again, a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful verse. This is Sri Lakshmi Devi herself speaking this. And let's go through this. First of all, an epistemological statement in the first two sentences. You are beyond the cognizance of the senses. So very, very interesting. This is speaking about pratyaksha, very specifically. This is speaking about knowing through the senses. Again, I always give, I often give examples like this when it comes to petty-minded little atheists in this world who always will demand, well, no one's ever seen God. Show me God. I'll believe in God if I can see him, and on like little petulant children, not understanding that they can't even see their own minds, and their minds are of no significance compared to God. If you think about this, can you see your own mind? No, you can't. Here, what color is my mind? How big is it? What shape is it in? We can't see even each other's minds. We can't even see our own mind. And yet we believe that empirically we should have the right to quote unquote see God, to have God be simply some dull object like a rock, like a moon rock or something that we can hold in our hands and weigh it, etc., etc. No, of course not. God is infinitely beyond the senses, because God being trans-empirical, God is a being who is being the source of indeed the senses. Of course, God is beyond sense. God is beyond any sort of senses whatsoever. So this is the first thing that Lakshmi Devi is making very, very clear here, that God is beyond the cognizance of the senses. Now she goes on to Anumana in the next sentence, that is inference, reasoning, logic. And she says that your end is impossible to know. So what is meant by this is that indeed, what is the goal of Vishnu? What are the purposes of Vishnu? What is it that Vishnu does? In other words, everything about Narayana is impossible to know. And this means through not just the cognizance of the senses, but also intellectually, by the mind as well. This is why the word know is here, because we know intellectually. So again, in the same way that God is beyond merely the senses, we can't just see God the way we can see a rock. We can't trip over God's foot the way we can trip over a rock as we're traversing a nice path in the forest, etc. Well, in the same way, God is also beyond intellect. And this aspect of Vedic epistemology is especially difficult for very, very, let's say, people who live in their minds, people who think that reason and rationality are quite literally everything, not understanding that while reason and rationality are extremely important tools that all spiritual people, all Vedic people understand must be employed and employed perfectly, like with the senses, even intellect has its bounds. There are some things that are beyond even intellect. So this is what she is saying in this sentence. But now we go on. You are brilliant. You are brilliant. Now, in what sense does she mean this? Well, one could say in all senses. Of course, this is a secondary sense. When we hear the word brilliant, we think of a person who's very, very intelligent. Well, God is very intelligent. But the primary sense in which we hear the word brilliant, the primary sense is that God is a being whose luster is such that it would put to shame the luster and the effulgence of an infinite number of suns. That God is the source of all light, not merely that God has light, but that God quite literally is the source of all light, including all light in the spiritual world and all light in the material world. See, it is the nature of Prakriti, Prakriti being insentient. It is the nature of Prakriti, it is the nature of materiality. The materiality necessarily is dark. There is no light to it, because spiritual light comes from spiritual beings. And this being the case, that which is insentient cannot have light. So thus, this is why the material world is primarily dark. People don't really think about this. But the material world is primarily dark. When you look into space, other than those sources of light, so other planets, stars, etc., we see blackness. We see just darkness. So it is indeed the spirit that is the source of light. Well, Sriman Narayana is the source of all brilliance, is the source of quite literally all light in existence. If we were to be in Vaikuntha now, if we were to be in the spiritual realm, what we would be in would be a realm quite literally of light, and not just any light, but the light of God. Envision being in a realm where everything, just like here, everything is made of material atoms. Imagine being in a realm where everything is made of the very light of God himself, of his very effulgence, of that power. That's the spiritual realm. But then even here in the material realm, this being the opposite, a realm of darkness, whatever light sources that there are, a sun, a moon, fire, etc., ultimately those light sources themselves even have God as their source. So God is brilliant. You hold the bow Sarnga. This is one of the, again, weapons of Vishnu. When we talk about Vishnu, again, there are many different forms of Vishnu, Narayana, etc. There are avatars, there are expansions, etc. And then there are many different kinds of avatars. There are Purna avatars, there are Avesha avatars, there are Yuga avatars, etc. This being the case, usually Narayana will have 4 arms, but sometimes he has more. Indeed, sometimes in his Vishvarupa, in his universal form, he'll have quite literally an infinite number of arms, each of which has a weapon or something symbolic, or a weapon, or again something. This is again one of the weapons of Narayana. And she continues, you are Varaha, you are the boar avatar. Varaha is indeed an avatar who comes in the form of a boar. Now, for people who have Abrahamic sensitivities, this will seem very strange. What, God can come in the form of a boar? Yes, this is God. God can come in any form he wants. If you begin to doubt, oh, but God can't come in the form of a boar, well, then you absolutely don't understand the nature of God. As soon as you say God can't, you have fallen short theologically of understanding the full scope of what it means to be God. But indeed, this is one of the avatars, and specifically, he saves the world. And it's a long story. I'm not going to give the story here, because as it is, we have a lot to go through. You are fiercesome. Fiercesome. This is a nice word, actually. And yeah, it's a very good word. You are fiercesome, meaning that indeed God is heroic, God is brave, God is fearsome when it comes to the upholding of that which is true, the upholding of that which is dharmic, and protecting his devotees very specifically. What I think of and what comes to mind when I hear Lakshmi Devi saying this, you are fearsome, is Vishnu in the protection of his devotees. When it comes to protecting his devotees, if one of his devotees is being harmed, and Vishnu is aware of this, whatever you do not want to come between Vishnu and that person who is harming his devotee. Because you will see indeed fearsomeness, the likes of which is indescribable. But Vishnu, Narayana, God protects us. And that being the case, he protects us against evil. And that being the case, this is what the eyes of evil should see the last second of their life, is they should see the fearsomeness of God protecting his devotee. So indeed, you are fearsome. You are Govinda, the protector of cows. Now, interestingly, this is one of the names of Narayana of Vishnu, and there are an infinite number of them. Indeed, there's one important scripture called Sri Vishnu-Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu. And that only covers a few of the important ones. There are actually thousands and thousands of important names of Vishnu or Narayana. And this is indeed one of them. And interestingly, often when people hear the name Govinda, they think that it is exclusively a name of Krishna specifically. It's actually not. It's one of the names of Narayana. Indeed, Hari is one of the names of Narayana. So when we hear the name Govinda, it is referring specifically to Narayana. And the reason why Krishna is also called Govinda is because he is Narayana. But this is referring to Narayana. He is the protector of the cows. And this means certainly when he comes upon the earth in the avatar form of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, but also generally speaking as well. Pastoral culture, the culture of taking care of cows, of farming, etc., is central to Vedic civilization. Indeed, we could say very easily it is central to all human civilization. Cities, especially when we talk about the cities that we think of today, New York City, Paris, London, Rome, Los Angeles, etc., when we think of these cities are inhuman. They are not considered to be the height of civilization. On the contrary, these places are places of barbarity. And on the contrary, for Vedic civilization, the idea is that sattvic living is the best way of living. So thus, Narayana is indeed the protector of such civilization, and thus the protector of the cows, because the cows are central to the economic structure of rural living. So this is why she says this. Let's go on. You are ancient. You are ancient. You are ancient. There is nothing that is more ancient than Lord Narayana. Lord Narayana being the first of all things, being the cause of all causes, being the source of all things, there is nothing that is more ancient than Narayana. And then finally, to end this verse, you are Purushottama. You are literally the Supreme Person. That's literally what Purushottama means. Purusha means person. It means two things. It means person, it means Atman. And then in the right source, it could mean either individual Atman, limited Atman, or Paramatman. But this is what Purusha means. And then Uttama means the supreme, the highest, that in which there is nothing greater. So together, Purushottama. This is another name of God, but this one especially is filled with philosophical Vedantic significance. And it is precisely because of the exact translation of this, which again, all Sanskritists agree on. This is nothing controversial. I'm a Sanskritist. All Sanskritists agree on this. The translation is the Supreme Person. So thus, Lakshmi Devi, who would know, being a goddess, B, not just any goddess, but the Supreme Goddess, C, being the eternal consort of Narayana, and then finally D, really non-distinct, co-absolute with Narayana. You can have all the happy little Vedantic debates you want about is God a person or impersonal. Lakshmi knows, not you. Lakshmi is in a position to know. And what does she call God? Oh, you are the Supreme Person. Supreme Person. So thus again, this is why we are personalists. This is why we understand that ultimately God is of the nature of personhood. Now, let us go on to the next verse, which is, again, chapter 1. These are all sequential. Chapter 1, and this is now verse 52. Your hair is golden, your eyes are everywhere. Your spiritual body is the sacrifice. You are free from stain. You are the field. That is the realm of material activity. You are the principle of life. You are the ruler of the world. You are lying on the bed of the ocean. Very good. Let's go through this. So first of all, again, very interesting. This is the correct translation. You know, it's interesting. I had one of my students earlier asking me if I have the ability to consult with the Sanskrit for these verses, in addition to the actual translations. And I explained that, oh yes, I have access to all the Sanskrit, actually. And I will often consult with the Sanskrit beforehand. So this is indeed correct. What the Sanskrit says is, your hair is golden. That is the word that is used, golden. So it's a very interesting thing. Vishnu's hair is described in various ways, actually. Sometimes it's described as darker, and there are instances where indeed his hair is described as being golden, of golden hue, of golden color. So this is why we have to be very, very careful. We have to be very intelligent. We have to be very open-minded when it comes to these descriptions of God. So when we see, let's say, very modern depictions of Vishnu, and to me, very modern means the last several hundred years, of course, he'll often have black hair. Well, that's not quite how he's described. His hair is indeed described as golden. That being the case, why is this the case? Well, first of all, we need to take this quite literally. This is part of standard traditional Vedic exegesis. It's exegetical methodology. That is, that the way that you understand Vedic scriptures is first you understand the literal. If by a literal understanding you still cannot understand what the verse or portion of the verse is saying, then you go to metaphor, and only then, and only as a radically last resort. So we are first of all to take this as literal, that Narayana's hair is golden. That's number one. Number two, now we can look at what this also means from a Vedic symbology perspective. Not any symbology, not Jung. No, Vedic symbology, because there is indeed some symbology in Vedic spirituality. It's rarely employed and only what it needs to be. So by golden, of course, what is also meant by this? What is also meant is excellence. What is also meant is the best. What is also meant is that his hair is golden, meaning that it is of the nature of beautiful luster. This is God. But now let's go on. Your eyes are everywhere. This is pointing to the omniscient nature of God. It's pointing to two things, actually, but this is the most important and easier to understand. This is pointing to the omniscience of God, i.e., that there is nothing that exists outside of the purview of God. You can scheme, you can plot, you can conspire all you want to. You can hide deep under the ground, anywhere you want, in the deepest darkness, and you can whisper to each other. God is there as that third person, listening. God is there. God is omniscient. There is nothing that happens. There is not a blade of grass blowing in the wind that God is not aware of. So this is what is being spoken of here, as God's eyes are everywhere. Maybe I'll leave it there for now. I won't go into anything deeper, just due to time. Your spiritual body is the sacrifice. So thus yagya, what is known as yagya. And that is fire sacrifice. Yagya, fire sacrifice, is one of the central ritual features of Vedic spirituality, especially when done in a very orthodox way. So what is being said here is that indeed it is Vishnu himself who even makes yagya, who even makes fire sacrifice a possibility. Now let's go on a little more. You are free from stain. Indeed, Lord Narayana is the purest of the pure. Every living being has some stain. Every living being has some imperfection. And by stain, it doesn't mean merely, let's say, something sinful, something terrible that a person has done. It means an imperfection. Some of us have to wear glasses. I don't. I did Taraka meditation for 6 months when I was about 13 years old. I have never had to wear glasses in my life. But some people do. That's an imperfection. That's a stain in a way. So Lord Narayana has literally zero stains of any sort whatsoever. In other words, he is the purest of the purest of the pure, and he remains that way eternally. So he is free from stain. You are the field, that is the realm of material activity. This is something that can be understood by looking at the Bhagavad Gita, because Krishna uses the exact same terminology when he explains that the field is indeed where the Atman is operative, i.e. the field meaning the material realm. So Lord Narayana is indeed the source of this field in which we're operating. Anything that you see around you, anything that you can conceive or perceive that is around you, including your very own body, Narayana is the source of that. So that is what's being said here. You are the principle of life. You are vitality itself, is what Lakshmi is saying to Narayana here. You are the principle of life. That is, you are prana. You are indeed that which is vitality itself. Every living being, if they are alive, they must have some vitality. They must have some prana, some life force to them. In some cases, some people have a lot. In some cases, people have a lot less, etc., depending on many, many different factors. But regardless of the diversity of degree in which an individual has vitality, any and all vitality that is there in any and all living beings ultimately has its source in Narayana. You are the ruler of the world. Oh, indeed. You are the ruler of the world. I've spoken so often, and for very, very important purpose. I've spoken so often about how we are lacking, for the most part, we are lacking true rulers today. What it means to be a true ruler. I've written about this. I have a book coming out in several weeks called Principles of Perfect Leadership, where we talk about what is a perfect ruler and what it means to be a perfect leader, etc., etc. Well, we know that we have a variety of rulers in the world, both historically and today. Many of whom are extremely imperfect, a few of whom are good rulers, etc., etc. But this is the important thing to ultimately understand, is that even if we were to look upon a vast ocean, an almost infinite ocean of absolutely perfect rulers, there is one being who stands out from all of these perfect rulers, and that is the ruler of all rulers. That is Sriman Narayana. God is the ultimate ruler of this world. Even if unseen by us, even if it's unbeknownst to us, nonetheless, God is the King of all kings. So that is what's being said. You are lying on the bed of the ocean. Indeed, this is how the material world comes about, that the material realm is in itself, in a way, a dream of Vishnu, a dream of Narayana. And he is lying on the ocean, and he is dreaming, and he is there with Lakshmi Devi, and as he exhales, an infinite number of universes are created, and as he inhales, an infinite number of universes are destroyed. And this is the grandeur of the nature of God. You see, need I even say this? Those little individuals who are out there of the New Age variety, or sadly of the Advaita variety, who want to drone on and on and on about, oh, I'm God, I am God, I am God. Oh, you've just forgotten that you're God. See, understanding the contradiction even in that very statement. You have forgotten that you're a God. You and your imperfection have forgotten that you're perfect. Oh, there's no contradiction there. But this is what is interesting, is that indeed this is the nature of God. That God is that being who, as he exhales, an infinite number of universes are created. As he inhales, an infinite number of universes are destroyed. And this is a tertiary aspect of God. In other words, it's not even, forget about primary aspect, it's not even a secondary aspect of God. It's a third aspect, it's a tertiary aspect of God. Such is the nature of God. So every time we hear one of these little New Age folk saying, oh, I'm God, you're God, we're all God, it's all God, everything, please keep this in mind. No, you're not someone for whom every time you exhale, you're creating universes. This is God. This is God. Let's go on. Now to chapter 1, verse 53. You are a mantra. You know the mantras. You surpass all conception. Your frame is composed of the Vedas and Vedangas. The creation and destruction of this whole world is effected through you. So again, let's go through this. I won't give anything away just yet. We'll just patiently go through this. You are mantra. What is mantra? What is mantra? See, again, it's interesting. If we wish to truly understand truth, we need to have infinite patience, and we need to approach truth in a very meditative, very contemplative way, open to what truth is actually saying to us. A person, again, can read any of these verses and just zip right through them. Now understanding that one sentence alone can be commented upon probably for 5 hours. You are mantra, Lakshmi is saying to Vishnu. So what is meant by this? First of all, what is mantra? Mantra is not just anything. Mantra, properly understood, again, not in a new age way, not, oh, make up your own mantra. No. A mantra is a sacred utterance, the nature of which is eternal and that is liberating. A mantra is a sound vibration that is non-distinct from God himself. The highest mantras, the most important mantras, are those mantras that consist of the names of God. So Lakshmi herself is confirming this and saying quite literally that indeed, that mantra that has your name. So, Om Namo Narayana, for example, is God. That sound vibration is non-distinct from God. So that is what is being said here. And then you know the mantras. Now, why does she say this? It's enough that he is mantra, but why does she say that you know the mantras? See, it's one thing to understand the ontological nature of mantras itself, i.e., the ontological nature of true mantras being non-distinct from God himself, i.e., purely transcendent. But more, he is also, that is Narayana, is also the source of all true mantras, meaning that if we are to understand a mantra, we are to understand that for a mantra to be a true mantra, it has to have Narayana as its source, i.e., it has to be revealed in the Vedic scriptures. So again, this is why there's no such thing as a made-up mantra. There's no such thing as, I decided to start trying to meditate a week ago, and I thought I would make up a mantra that sounded nice to me. You know, it was a combination of, wishful thinking and something I heard in a Britney Spears song a few years ago, and this and that. And I just kind of put it together and created my... No, that's not a mantra. God is the source of all mantras, and no one else. Now, let's go on. You surpass all conception. Again, another epistemological statement that I won't go very deeply into, but that, again, she is confirming that God is beyond the intellect. God is beyond logic. God is that being who is trans-rational, not irrational. You see, it's interesting, again, for atheists, all of whom falsely claim that they are the champions of rationality and religion is irrational. They can only see things in this bifurcated sort of way, rational, irrational. In actuality, true spirituality is neither. It does not consist of only the intellectual, but neither is it irrational. It's not something that's absurd. On the contrary, it's transrational, meaning that its very existence can only be understood by going beyond the bounds of the intellect. So, you surpass all conception. Your frame is composed of the Vedas and Vedangas. The Vedas and the Vedangas are supplements to the Smriti literature. We don't have to go deeply into that. You can look up what these works are. These are also important scriptures. But what Sri Lakshmi Devi is saying here is that indeed the Vedas and the Vedangas, as important as they are, they're simply an aspect of you. Think about this. For those of you who have been with me for some time, and you understand at this point what is the nature of this divine literature, this divine sound vibration, primarily that then secondarily becomes written down as in actual literary form. When you understand the importance and the significance of the Vedas as conveyor of absolute and perfect truth, and now you see this statement, that the Vedas and Vedangas, what she is saying is, they're just an aspect of you. These are secondary to you. They are attributes of you. So in other words, as important as the Vedas are, they are secondary in importance to Vishnu himself. Vishnu is, in other words, the source of Veda, of wisdom, of true knowledge. And now let's go on. And this last sentence confirms what I was saying in the last sentence of the previous verse. The creation and destruction of this whole world is effected through you. So again, it is Sriman Narayana who is ultimately really the creator, but who is also the reason for dissolution of every material world. Let's go on now to Vishnu-Dharma-Sastra, chapter 1, verse 54. You know what is right and what is wrong. Your spiritual body is Dharma. Dharma springs from you. Desires are gratified by you. Your powers are everywhere. You are imperishable like Amrita, ambrosia. You are heaven. You are the destroyer of Madhu. Very nice. Now let's go through this. First of all, you are the knower of what is right and what is wrong. Indeed, there is right and there is wrong. Any individual who would try to claim that what it means to be spiritual is to go, quote unquote, beyond good and evil is a psychopath, not a spiritual person. We believe in good, we believe in bad, and we believe that good is to be accepted and embraced, bad is to be rejected. And here, Lakshmi Devi is saying, you know what is right and you know what is wrong. Confirming that there is indeed, that these two things do exist, that there is a distinction between the two, and that the differentiation is established by Vishnu himself. So thus, morality and ethics are central to what it means to be a true spiritual person. Let's go on. Your spiritual form, your spiritual body is Dharma. Dharma is indeed a manifestation of the very grace of God within the material realm. And indeed, it's actually been said in some places in Vedic scripture, and actually interestingly in other places as well, that grace in and of itself is of the luster of God, that it emanates quite literally from God. This being the case, Dharma is understood to be the grace of God as that grace is concretized within the material world as law, such that if we follow Dharma, what we are doing is we are opening ourselves then to the grace of God. That essentially in a nutshell is what is being said with this sentence. But now let's go on. Dharma springs from you. So again, Dharma also has its source in Narayana. Not just in anyone, not just in anything, but Dharma itself has a source, and that source is God. That source is Narayana. Desires are gratified by you. Indeed, desires, whether good desires, bad desires, neutral desires, whatever desires that there are, these desires ultimately are gratified by God. Now, of course, every living being, God knows, every living being has desires. And again, both good desires, bad desires, desires to attain something that we want or think we want, desires to avoid something that we do not want or think we do not want. But in any case, all beings have desires. And when those desires are gratified, they will often be gratified by an intermediary. In other words, I desire X thing. Oh, this nice person, this other human, will grant that desire for me, and I'm now satiated. But in actuality, what Lakshmi is saying here is that the source of the gratification of all desires ultimately is God. So even if it seems like another person who's satisfying our desires, or the universe, or a lesser god, goddess, etc., ultimately, that ability to grant desires comes ultimately from God, because God is, again, the source and the sustainer of all things. So let's go on. Your powers are everywhere. Omnipotence. This is the omnipotence of God. We spoke earlier about the omniscience of God and several other features, actually. I didn't necessarily name them just due to lack of time. But now we're talking about the omnipotence of God. Your powers are everywhere. In other words, there is nothing, there is no ability that is outside of the scope of God. There is nothing that God cannot do. What this is known as is omnicompetency. in philosophical language, actually. I studied philosophy of religion under one of the greatest professors of philosophy of religion upon the planet, actually. Keith Yandel is his name. I gave out his name. You can all look him up now. But I literally studied with him. And this is a concept that is found specifically in the field of philosophy of religion. And what omnicompetency means is very simply that there is nothing that is outside of the scope of God's ability. So there's nothing that God cannot do. God has all powers. So this is what Sri Lakshmi Devi is saying here. Your powers are everywhere. You are imperishable like Amrita or nectar, ambrosia. God is imperishable. In other words, God is eternal. God is immortal. Immortal not in the sense that, oh, he was mortal at one time and some magic happened and now he has immortality, which is how people tend to think of the word immortal. That's why I tend to steer away from that word, rather eternal. Imperishable is also another good word. God is imperishable, like Amrita. Amrita is a nectar that brings about immortality, but Amrita itself is something that is an eternal substance. So in saying that God is imperishable like Amrita itself, what Sri Lakshmi is saying here is, in the same way that Amrita is eternal, you also are eternal, you are imperishable. God does not perish. It doesn't come to a point where God gets old and God leaves existence. God has eternal existence. And now we go on. You are heaven. You are heaven. You are Svarga. Svarga is what in so many different, especially Indo-European religions, but really almost every traditional and real religion upon the face of the earth. And I need to make that distinction. There are real religions and there are fake religions. Anything more modern or made up or new age, etc., it's not religion. It's not to be taken seriously. All ancient religions, all authentic religions believe in the concept of heaven. That is, that within the material cosmos, there is a realm that is very high, that is not the spiritual realm, but rather it is the abode of the gods. Well, what Lakshmi Devi here is making very clear is that indeed, yes, we believe in many gods and goddesses. They are material beings. They are beings who they are like us. They are Atmans, who they have that high position because of good karma. They may live for 1 million, 10 million years, 100 million years. Indeed, in the case of Brahma, for multiple billions of years. But nonetheless, what Lakshmi is saying here is that that realm of the gods, what we would call heaven, what we would call Svarga, you are that. You are the source of that. You are the sustainer even of the realm of the gods. And you are the destroyer of Madhu. Madhu was a demonic being who was destroyed indeed by Vishnu. And why is this even mentioned here? More so than the story of this being, which I could tell, is what is more important is the fact that Vishnu himself is indeed the destroyer of adharma, the destroyer of evil, and that Vishnu does not tolerate evil beings and demonic beings. So Vishnu is the destroyer of demonic beings. And now let's go on to the next verse, and this is Vishnu-Dharma-Sastra, Vishnu Smriti, and it is chapter 1, verse 55. You cause the increase of the great. You are inscrutable. You are everything. You give shelter to all. You are the chief one. You are free from sin. You are inexhaustible. You are the creator. So quite a bit being said here, but we can actually go through this somewhat quickly. You are the cause of the increase. You cause the increase of the great. Now, there are great people around us all the time, great beings, but let's just deal with what we can relate to, great humans. There are all sorts of great humans around us. And by great doesn't necessarily mean that they are good, but meaning that they're powerful. Whether they are politicians, whether they're extremely wealthy millionaires and billionaires, whether they are celebrities who have fame to the point where half the planet recognizes them, etc., etc., etc. There are all kinds of great people in academia who had great accomplishments, a scientist who discovered something very important, etc., etc. Well, what Lakshmi Devi is saying here of Narayana is, you are the cause. You cause the increase of the great. In other words, those great people, and again, all beings, but let's talk about people. Those great people who are people of accomplishment, God is the cause of that. It is by the blessings, it is by the grace of Sriman Narayana alone that great people have anything that they have. If you have heard of someone, this one's a billionaire, this one is worth $100 billion, this person did this person did that. It is ultimately by the grace of God alone that indeed they have increased whatever they have to that point. Let's go on. You are inscrutable, very difficult to know. A person who is inscrutable is someone who you look at them and you can't really quite tell what is their ultimate nature. Well, this is the nature of God, that indeed to fully understand what is happening in God's mind, what is happening internally with God, is an impossibility. God is inscrutable. God is a being who is not easily known. God is a being who you can explore God. You can explore God for infinity. You can explore God in every way conceivable, and still God will remain a mystery to you. But at the same time, those mysteries begin to unfold by one thing and one thing only, and that is devotion. That's the wonder of the inscrutability of God, is that that curtain can only be parted by devotion. Let's go on. You are everything. Need we say more? Lord Vishnu, Lord Narayana, you are everything. You are everything. This one sentence alone, really 3 words in the English language, we could talk about for hours. And we could talk about this from the exoteric, literally just what is the actual denotation of the very words themselves, to then the most esoteric meaning of the fact that God is indeed everything. What does that mean for the devotee? Indeed, God is everything in the sense that God is the source of everything. But for the devotee, God is everything. For the devotee, very specifically, what this means is, in the same way that even materially you fall in love with someone. No, you don't just love. You fall in love with that person. That person becomes everything for you. In the same way, when we have devotion toward God, in that devotion, Sriman Narayana are literally everything. There is nothing else that exists for us. So thus you, Sriman Narayana, you are everything. You give shelter to all. Indeed, God gives shelter to all beings. That is, whatever state you find yourself in. Because however strong we may be, and we should be strong always, we should have courage always, etc. But regardless of who we are, you can be the strongest person in existence, materially speaking. You can be a very strong person in this world. And yet at the same time, there are times when we need help. There are times when we need shelter, where we are going through a time of confusion or sadness or trauma or something. And we need to take shelter. And indeed, those strong individuals who also have the humility to understand that there are times when, yes, I may be strong, but I need to take shelter of God. Those are the individuals who open themselves indeed to the grace of God. So you give shelter to all. You are the chief one. You are the chief. So again, in whatever context we can think of as far as rulers, kings, authorities, etc., etc., God is that being who is above them all. You are free from sin. Indeed, there is nothing of the nature of evil. There is nothing of the nature of the immoral, the unethical, of any darkness, of any blackness whatsoever that exists in God. It is an absolute impossibility. God is of necessity a being of good, of purity, and of light, and of love. This being the case, Narayana is free of sin. You are inexhaustible. Indeed, we only have to look at the preamble of the Sri Isha Upanishad to understand this, that God is a being who, it's not that in creating an infinite number of universes he has to use like a battery. He has to use, 49% of his power. No, God can create an infinite number of universes and he is not diminished in the slightest way. He is inexhaustible. That is the nature of God. You are the creator. There is a secondary creator. Again, as I was saying earlier, every universe has a secondary creator. That is Brahma. Every universe has a Brahma. But ultimately, that Brahma has the ability to create only due to the mercy and the grace and the order of Narayana. Now, we have one more verse to do, and only one more. And I thank you all for bearing with me. We are going a little touch over time. For those of you who have stuck with us so far, please stick with us for just a few more minutes, because we have only one verse to do left. And this is Vishnu-Dharma Shastra, chapter 1, verse 56. You increase the welfare of the world. The waters spring from you. You are the seat of intelligence. Material action is not found in you. You preside over 7 things. You are the teacher of religious rites. You are of the ancient. You are Purushottama. Very good. So let us go through this. You increase the welfare of the world. Wherever there is God, wherever there is that which is of the nature of God. In other words, wherever there is Vedic civilization, wherever there are individuals and societies that are following Dharma, wherever there are individuals who are spiritual, who are upholding Dharma, etc., etc., well, the welfare of the world is increased. And all of that list that I just gave, are secondary to God, because God is the source of Veda. God is the source of anything Vedic. God is the source of Dharma, etc. So wherever God is present, or those activities that are godly, the welfare of the world increases. Things get better and better and better. Society has prosperity, has peace, etc., has health. Very good. The waters spring from you. This is very straightforward. Everything springs from God. And in this particular case, Lakshmi Devi is talking about the waters. We can't exist without water, just like we can't exist without food, just like we can't exist without air, just like we can't exist without sunshine. So by saying that the waters spring from you, what Lakshmi Devi is saying is that in the same way that waters give us life and so much more, we can water our crops. We couldn't have food without water. We can clean only because of water, etc., etc. The waters themselves have you as their source origin. So thus we acknowledge you as the source. You, Sriman Narayana, as the source of water. You are the seat of intelligence. Indeed, any intelligence that any of us have. If you see yourself as an intelligent person, God forbid, maybe even an academician, maybe even an intellectual. I don't consider myself an intellectual. I consider myself once in a while intelligent, but not an intellectual. But if you are indeed someone who is intelligent, it is, again, as a result of God that you have that intelligence. And she continues, material action is not found in you. We, as living beings, having either fallen into illusion or one way or another, having come into this material world, we all engage in material activity. We all engage in material actions. And material actions meaning actions that are motivated by any sort of self-desire, self-gratification, etc. So as a result, we accumulate karma. Very simply, what Lakshmi is saying here is such action, material action, is not something that you engage in. You being God, Narayana, a being who of necessity cannot fall under illusion. And now let's go on. You preside over the 7 chief things. And the 7 chief things, very, very simply, are the 7 higher planetary systems. That's how this is understood traditionally. There are 14 planetary systems, 7 of which are lower, 7 of which are higher, beginning with the Earth and going all the way up. So this is what's being described here, that you preside over these 7 higher planetary systems. So in other words, again, everything from the human all the way up to Brahma himself and all of the devas, this various strata of divine beings in between, of Daivika beings in between, that Lord Narayana is the source of all such realms. You are the teacher of religious rites. Narayana is the ultimate guru. Again, really, this is an epistemological statement. And we've looked at similar statements where it explains that all true knowledge, all spiritual knowledge, if it is to be seen as legitimate, as authentic, as perfect, it must have God and only God as its ultimate source. So this being the case, it's understood that really God is the ultimate guru. God is Adi Guru, is the first of all gurus. You are the ancient. And again, this is a repetition, but repetitions are done for important reasons, always. So again, she's emphasizing that you are eternal, that never has there been a time when you were not in existence. This is the nature of God, and this is the nature of also Atmans, but very specifically, she's speaking of God here, that you are eternal. And then finally, she ends by repeating this very important point. You, Sriman Narayana, you are Purushottama. You are the Supreme Person. So again, ending this section of the Vishnu-Dharma Shastra with this extremely important point that again, this is not open to Vedantic debate between Advaitins and Vishishta Advaitins. This is not open to debate. Not open to debate. This is not just anyone. This is not even such and such so-and-so Acharya saying it. So-and-so Rishi saying it. This is Sri Lakshmi Devi, who is co-absolute with Sriman Narayana, who is saying this. You are the supreme, not rock in the sky, not you are the supreme energy floating around that I can hopefully have access to, like I'm looking for a light socket to plug in my my electrical cord. No, you're not just the great energy in the sky. You, Sriman Narayana, you, God, you are the supreme person, the supreme personality of Godhead. And this is how she ends this one section, by again reaffirming this, that you are indeed the Purushottama. You are that person who is the utmost, who is the supreme. So with that, I thank you all very much for being here. As you can see, this was something somewhat different that we did today. I will not be taking questions because we don't have time. Rather, I wanted to give these verses the time that God knows they deserve. That they deserve. That's putting it lightly. So we're a little bit over time, so I will end here. Let me just say that the next time that we get together, that is next Monday, what we're going to be doing is a full hour of questions and answers. So to make up for the fact that we couldn't take questions this time, the next time that we get together, it'll be a full hour of questions and answers. So with that, I thank you for being here. Please visit our website when you have a chance, Dharma Central. You'll see all of our books and mantra meditation album, etc. Much more information about this wonderful path known as Sanatana Dharma there on our main website, dharmacentral.com. And with that, I thank you all for being here, and namaste. Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Om Hari Om. And with that, everyone, until we come together again next Monday, I ask you all to please take very good care of yourselves in every way.